Well, hello there. Pastor Woody here from the Abundant Life Church in Phillipsburg, coming at you once again from my home because we're not having services on account of the COVID virus. We're being safe about that. I think maybe we'll have live services next Sunday, though. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that. We'll see. We have to just play it by ear. But anyway, just before Thanksgiving, Jim and Eddie were out hunting for turkeys when Jim keels over and collapses. Eddie runs over and Jim doesn't seem to, he's not breathing. His eyes are glazed over, there's no pulse. He looks pretty much like he's a goner, he's dead. So Eddie gets his cell phone out, and he calls 911. And he's gasping, "My friend Jim is dead, what can I do?" And the operator says, "Calm down, I can help. First, let's make sure that he's dead." So there's silence on the phone. Then a shot rings out. And she hears footprints coming back in the leaves. And back on the phone, Eddie says, "Okay, now what?" Sorry. But here's we're talking about Joseph in the Bible today, Joseph. And the background is this: Abraham's son with Sarah was Isaac. He also had a son with Hagar, the Ishmaelite, or Ishmael, which was the father of Ishmaelites. After Isaac was weaned, Hagar and Ishmael were sent away at the request of Sarah. Later, Abraham sent his servant to get a wife for Isaac. Her name was Rebekah. She had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Later on, Jacob was under a death threat from his brother, and he, escaping from his brother, went to the land where Abraham's relatives were living. After working for Laban for several years, Jacob wound up with two wives, Rachel and Leah. Jacob had sons with both of them and also their servant girls, Bilhah and Zilpah. And these sons were the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons was Joseph, whose mother was Rachel. Joseph was the second to last son of Jacob. This is part of the story of Joseph. In Genesis 37, verse 2 to 11, it says this: "This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah. Those were his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. These other two wives, besides Rachel and Leah, were servants of Rachel and Leah, but they were given to Jacob to have children with. But he was married to them. They were his wives. He had 4 wives at this point. So the conflict didn't start with the bad report. He brought a bad report about his brothers. The conflict didn't start with the bad report. But the fact that Joseph was a tattletale, that didn't help anything. Being a tattletale, whether it's true or not, causes bad feelings, especially among siblings. On the other side, his brothers must have been doing something evil or dangerous or destructive for him to go and tell his father about. Verse 3, "Now Israel loved Joseph," Israel being Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Parents, Beware. Never show favoritism among your children. Even if you favor one over the others, even if you're fonder than one over the others, never let that show. Treat them all equally, love them all the same, because a sibling rivalry is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. It may rear its ugly head anyway. They'll find another reason to be in rivalry, but don't you cause it. Don't you cause it, okay? So that favoritism, that hatred, rivalry should never be as a result of parental favoritism. They were so bitter in their hatred that they could not speak to him. That's really bad feelings. My mother had 4 brothers. The oldest one, because of something happened when they were young men, would never speak to one of the younger ones. I think, I don't know how far apart they were in age, but he carried that to the grave. He lived away from Pennsylvania for a long time, and then he moved back, and my mother said, "You want to go see your brother?" He says, "No, I'm not going to forgive him. I'm not going to talk to him." Carried it to the grave. Carried it to the grave. Sibling rivalry. And that's a bad thing, bad. But his brothers were so bitter in their hatred, they were probably thinking, "Father never made anything like that for us." Speaking of the fancy robe that he had made, we're his sons too. We take care of his flocks and everything for him, but he hasn't made anything about like that with us. What's so special about him? What's so special? We're his sons too. Have you ever been there? You know, hurt breeds hate. Hurt breeds hatred. And hatred is very hard to overcome. Some take it, like my uncle, to the grave. Verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So what motivation could Joseph possibly have to tell them about this dream? Would Joseph tell them about his dream unless he's just flaunting himself against them? Can you picture him walking around in that fancy robe with his head up, putting on airs, and then telling them his dream? I think he was just tweaking them, just prodding them and tweaking them. Not realizing that he was pouring gasoline on the fire of their hatred. So at this point, he was 17 years old. He had probably been behaving like this, I'll bet, for some time. I don't think this was anything new. This built up for a long time. In verse 6, he said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Verse 8, his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then, words have powerful effects. Kind words have beneficial effects. We all like to hear kind words. "Well done," "I love you," how about, we all like that. My mother used to say, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. I'm not sure I practiced that very well when I was younger, but I learned to adopt that frame of mind, and I do practice that, and I have for most of my life, actually. Don't say anything at all if you can't say something positive and beneficial. Negative words have a negative effect. You will remember someone's negative words against you, longer than you remember complimentary words. That hurt lasts a long time. Joseph may have been something of a brat. He may have been something of a brat. It could be that if we knew him, we wouldn't like him very well at this point when he was 17 years old. Verse 9, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen to me, he said. I had another dream. And this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. I know that he had these dreams. I know that he did. But he should have been more judicious about how he shared them, or not share them at all. However, this was all part of God's plan. Joseph's arrogance in sharing the dream was a weakness of his. The hateful reaction of the brothers was a weakness. God used these two weaknesses, these two character flaws, to accomplish his purposes. God uses character flaws. He does. Verse 10, when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Even his father, Jacob, who had made Joseph the fancy coat and probably favored him in other ways as well, rebuked him. Of course, no one knew where these dreams were coming from. They didn't know that they were from God. Even Joseph probably didn't know that at this point. But here's the result. All of this teasing, taunting, and the resulting hatred came to a head. Joseph was sent by Jacob to check out on his brothers who were tending their father's flocks. Apparently, Joseph would know where they were. Why he wasn't with them helping to tend the flocks, I don't know, because in verse 2, it says he was tending the flocks with his brothers. So he must have gone home for some reason. But now he was sent to them to see how they were doing, to see if they were okay. So they see him coming. They probably recognize at a distance the fancy garment. Except for Reuben, the oldest, they decided to kill him. So when Reuben heard this is then in verse 21 to 28, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Reuben was going to return to the cistern later on, get him out of there, and take him back home. Here we have an honorable man, Reuben, an honorable man, the firstborn. His intent is to restore Joseph to his father. He's the oldest son of Jacob. He had a different heart than the others. He doesn't want to shed his brother's blood. He has a conscience. He's concerned about his father. He doesn't want to cause his father grief. He's concerned about that. I think God was speaking to him because God had a plan. Joseph must go to Egypt. He must go to Egypt. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, which was the symbol of his arrogance against them and their father's favoritism against them. And verse 24, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water, as they sat down to eat their meal. So it's the callous attitude. Throw your brother into a cistern, then sit down and have lunch. If they were this hard-hearted, I wonder what things they might have been doing that Joseph tattled about. You can let your imagination run wild there. And continuing verse 25, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. I really don't know who these people were. Ishmaelites, you would think, were descended from Abraham through the Egyptian woman Hagar. Her son was Ishmael. Her son and Abraham's son was Ishmael. That was his name. Well, I don't know if there's enough history time to go by here that they would have had a culture with caravans. I don't know. I don't understand about this. But they were also referred to later as Midianites. Midian was a son of Abraham, and his second wife, whose name was Keturah. They had several sons. But continuing in verse 25, their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. Now, that was Judah's attitude, but his attitude was a little different. He wanted to see what he could get out of selling his brother. He wasn't trying to rescue him. He just wanted to see what he could get. So the brothers agreed. Verse 28, so when the Midianite merchants came, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. We don't know, because it isn't recorded, what Joseph was saying all this time. Help, help, rescue me. I don't know how they got him to keep quiet, if they got him to keep quiet. The Ishmaelites didn't care what he was saying. It's a strange thing, and you have to kind of read between the lines and see what you think was going on there. But Joseph is going into slavery. Joseph's arrogance toward his brothers almost got him killed. It did get him into slavery. But the lesson from that is Proverbs 21:23, those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. Joseph, at least at this point, was not a mouth guarder, but we should be. We should be very judicious and cautious about what comes out of our mouth. His father, Jacob, is in now for a long period of grief. Joseph was the first son with Rachel, whom he loved. He had 6 sons and a daughter with Leah, Rebekah's sister, had sons with Zilpah and Bilhah, but this was the first of only 2 with Rachel, and he loved Rachel, and so he loved Joseph and showed a lot of favoritism toward him. Very unwise, but that's what he did. Psalm 34:18 says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Jacob would be a brokenhearted man once he was informed by his sons that Joseph was killed. He would be a brokenhearted man, and he would carry that grief for a long time, until he finally was reconnected with Joseph in the land of Egypt. The brothers now have to live with guilt. They're guilty of eliminating their brother, from their family. They would have to live with this guilt without being able to tell anyone what they had done. They would have to keep quiet about this terrible thing. They were going to carry it to the grave. They really were. But Jeremiah 33:8 says this, I will cleanse them from all the sin they have committed against me, and I will forgive all their sins of rebellion against me. God will forgive every sin. Jesus died to pay the penalty for every sin. He really did, and God will forgive us. We just have to accept it. We just have to accept it and confess that he is Lord. So, Joseph was arrogant. That was his weakness. Jacob was a favoritism guy. That was his weakness. The brothers were reacting in hatred and jealousy. That was their weakness. But God is able to take all of our weaknesses and all of our failures and use them for his purposes. His purposes. So when you think you have failed, you might think you have failed God. You might think if you have failed in some way, didn't accomplish what you had hoped to accomplish. When you think you have failed, realize that God might be using your weakness and your failures for his purpose. That's a powerful thought and a good way to pray. Lord, are you going to use my weakness for your purposes? You know, our weakness is God's strength. God's strength could come show through. If we're proud and arrogant and don't show any remorse about weaknesses we have, then how's God going to work? He'll use somebody else. But God is able to take our failures, the failure of Joseph, the failure of Jacob, and the failure of those brothers, and use them all for his purposes. He's going to Egypt, and that is to be continued. So my friends, I hope to see you soon. If we reopen this coming Sunday, we'll be there. If not, we'll record another one from the house here. But God bless everyone. Hope to see you soon.